Hello and welcome, students of NKT. Thank you for joining us at another episode of Test Don't Guess. I'm excited to have on today Marissa from Ottawa, Illinois. Marissa is a manual movement therapist. She's level 3 NKT and an instructor. She owns her own practice out there. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So can you tell me the first time you heard about NKT? What was that experience like?
I was kind of like, what is this? In all honesty, I can't remember, as so many of us in the beginning, Perry Nicholson was the one who was, exploiting all this crazy stuff that he was finding. And I think I had started seeing some of his posts on Facebook about it, and didn't really connect what exactly was happening. But then David actually sent me a friend request. And I'm like, who is this guy? And then he said, like my page as soon as I accepted his friend request. I'm like, okay, what's your page? So I kind of had to stalk him a little bit to figure out, who he was, what he was doing. And then I was like, light bulbs. Oh, this is this guy. Okay.
Yeah.
So of course I, liked the page and just kept following it from there. So I think it was literally, obviously because I'm out in the Midwest, and hadn't heard of David before. It was just social media that kind of started it for me.
So just through like Facebook and social media that connected you, and had you even really like seen it and you'd like experienced it or?
No,
No.
not at all. Go ahead.
So what was the point that brought you to actually taking a seminar?
So I'm one of those people that I started off very clinical in nature. I liked a lot of the correctives and everything like that with my practice. And then when I moved out to Ottawa, I started looking for a place to practice out here. And I ended up in a salon, which was completely different than what I wanted to do. And I was following David more and more and figuring things out. And I just kind of went, you know what, this is something I definitely want to do, something I want to get back to doing what I really enjoy doing and keep growing that aspect of my practice. And I ended up having a different seminar fall through. NKT was one of those things I'm like, I'm probably not ready for it yet. I'll just wait and see what happens. I'll put it on the back burner. And then I had another seminar fall through, and I was like, well, the money's already gone. I might as well, I don't have it right now. I might as well put it towards NKT. And actually, Sean Kitzman, it just so happened that within like a month of that class canceling, Sean Kitzman was hosting David in Michigan in the Midwest for the very first time. He had only been teaching in California and had only had like one level 1 in New York City at that time. So I'm like, all right, let's do it. So someday became very soon, and I took it, and that was it.
And what'd you think of it on that first seminar?
So I have a story about that.
Oh, tell me the story.
Back when I took it, we were still doing like a 3-hour Friday evening and then a all-day Saturday, Sunday type of deal.
I heard of those.
Yeah, so the Friday evening was kind of like, this is the theory behind NKT. This is, why you've been doing things backwards for so long and something different to look into. And it was kind of that whole preemptive thing, like we cut that down. We do it like an hour now in the beginning of the seminar, but this was like a full 3 hours of explaining why you're going to be looking at things the way you are. And I was in Michigan, and I went back to my hotel room. And of course, my husband was like, call me as soon as you get back. Let me know what you think of the first night. I'm sobbing on the bed. I'm like, I'm an awful practitioner. I've been doing so many bad things in my life. No. I like had a complete mental breakdown after the first night. I was like, this is awful. It was actually pretty amusing. So, yeah. So after that, my husband was like, oh, you'll be fine. And yeah, so the next morning I went back in and I had a completely open mind about let's figure out what's going on and why. And at that point, there wasn't videos or things like that. And when I came home from that first NKT seminar, I was by myself. Like, there's nobody else here. Literally, I was the first person in Illinois. There was nobody here, so I had an option of, oh, you want a study group? Go to California. Oh, you want a study group? Go to New York. So I had to learn by stalking the advanced practitioners. So it was an interesting weekend, but it was definitely worth it.
Well, that sounds like a good game-changing experience, maybe just not in the way you thought. Yeah.
Right. That's actually one of the things I tell my classes is that the people who find NKT tend to be, at the top of their game. They're really doing great work. And then they get to this seminar and they just kind of like, there's leakage, right? All of a sudden they go, oh my, there's so much I don't know, and there's so much more I need to know, and you get knocked down a couple pegs, and it's very humbling, but it's totally worth it if you can handle it and just kind of let the ego go and learn.
Mm-hmm. And what year was that when you took level 1?
That was in 2012.
Okay, and how long had you been practicing before taking that?
2003.
Okay.
That's when I got my license. And
okay.
So about 8 or 9 years, I had really been doing a lot of stuff, a lot of different kinds of deep tissue, like neuromuscular therapy and myoskeletal alignment, myofascial release, doing all of those.
Yeah. Okay. And then what was your progression into level 2, level 3? Did you do those right away? Did you kind of take your time with it? I mean, how hard was it to sort of grasp the concepts of level 1 and then move on from there?
Well, like I said, I was by myself. So there was, her Della Melville. She came in, she took a class in like January or February in New York. And after I had taken my level 1, so it was about 6 months or whatever after I had taken it, and she wasn't even home from the class yet, and I was sending her a message like, "Let's get together. We need to play."
That's great.
Yeah. So as soon as I found out somebody else was from the Chicagoland area that was taking it, I was just like, okay. So play friends. So it took a while. I think sometime in the first of the year. I can't remember if it was January or February or March, but it was about 6 months after I took level 1 that I finally went and took level 2. And I think that was a really good time frame, because in 6 months, I got a lot of really great successes and a lot of failures and a lot of times where I was like, there's something more. And I mean, you know how it works, right? Then all of a sudden you get all of these cases coming in, all these people that you start seeing, and you're like, I need to up my game now. It's time, because they're telling me I need to move on. And it just so happens that that's pretty much what happened about that 6 month point. So I ended up going out to California, where I met, all of the California crew, Thomas Wells, Jory Sirota, all those guys, Bob Gazzo, it was a good time, because all these names that I've been seeing, people who had been doing NKT for many, many years, and I was getting to meet all of them and learn from them. And that was pretty fabulous. Then level 3, I didn't take the first level 3 that was in New York. Level 2 actually happened after I started taking NKT. It was only level 1 at first, and then we brought in level 2. And level 3 hadn't even been on the radar yet. So then when they finally got a level 3 class in, that was in the fall or something. And I didn't make it to that one. I think it was a good year and a half, maybe, after I took level 2, and I went back out to California. And it was pretty fantastic. So it was a good 2-year process, I think, to go from level 1 to level 3. I didn't push it. I didn't rush it. I made sure that I felt comfortable. And like I tell everybody, you're going to get to level 2 and you're going to go, I know way more than I thought I did, and I still have so much to learn. And the same thing happens at level 3. Everybody, I just did a Skype call for somebody who's going into level 3 this past weekend, and she was in full panic mode. It's like, that's cool. It's going to be exactly the same thing. You're going to go there. You're going to go, oh, I actually know what I'm doing. And then you're going to go, oh, wait, I'm going to have my brains explode and I'm going to freak out again for the next 2 months until I start feeling comfortable.
Oh, yeah.
So.
At what point did you kind of get that feeling comfortable or feeling confident? Or, I mean, sometimes it's almost like you never feel confident with it because there's so much to always be learning and expanding into. But was there a point where you're like, no. The confusion is less now than it was. Like, I can do this. I mean, you're an instructor now. At what point was it like, I'm confident in this?
Sometime between that level 2, level 3 is when I felt good because I had changed my practice completely. Like, that was a little interesting where I finally stopped doing regular massage completely. Like, didn't interest me anymore. I was no longer scheduling any new clients with it. So I was literally doing all NKT work all the time.
Wow.
After my level 2. So I lost a lot of clients. I gained a lot more new clients. So about then, when I was doing it all the time is when I felt pretty comfortable with it.
Yeah.
So by the time I got to level 3, I felt really good and was like, no worries. Let's do it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about the transition of your business and what did it look like before you did NKT? What does it look like now that you've been doing NKT for a while? Tell me kind of the comparison.
So before NKT, like I said, I did a lot of, I was kind of known as the person to go to for the deep tissue work, right? So basically, if you wanted it dug out, I was the person to go to because, I had this motto, like, if you get hurt in my session, that's your fault, not mine, because you didn't tell me to back off.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it was one of those things where, I wasn't afraid to, those people that come in and they're like, kill it.
Yeah.
You asked for it, so I went for it. But then it was one of those things where people would come in 2, 3, 4 weeks later and they're like, my friend Bob is back, or Rhoda on this side. I literally have people who name their knots, right?
I know that. Yeah.
So they'd come back in, knots. They'd come back in saying, this is what it is. And it's still there. Like, all right. And they just want it again and again and again. And it was driving me crazy. Like, I'm throwing all of this stuff at it. By the time they leave, it's like butter, but then they'd come back. And after NKT, I was like, okay, now I understand why, because those things were more than likely holding on for dear life. They were like, oh no, I'm not letting go because, this is all I have to hold on to. And people either got it or they didn't, and we talk about it all the time where you kind of have to make this judgment call, right? Where ethically speaking, that this is going to be more effective doing the NKT work and you're going to get to the root of the problem faster. But there's some people that just didn't want to have anything to do with it. They're like, no, I want you to dig it. I want you to get in there and I want you to do as much as, deep tissue work as you can. And you kind of get to this whole dilemma when you start doing more and more NKT work is, are you going to keep them on your schedule as a client, keep them coming back, even though you know that you're not as effective as you could be because they don't want it? Or are you just going to go, all right, you're paying my gas bill this month. Yeah. Just accept the checks, and go, okay, I'm going to give you what you want. Now, in the beginning, I did more of that. I'm like, all right, because I honored that relationship that I had with clients very early on. They had been with me for a long time and they just weren't interested in, coming in and having muscle testing done, and they weren't interested in this new protocol. They were just kind of like, I just want to come and be a vegetable on the table and have you dig in as hard as you can. And I want to leave here feeling like a puddle, it's like, all right. So I kind of just kept with that for a little while. And then with the transition, like I was saying, it just got to a point where I was done with that, so I had 5 therapists working for me at the time. And I said, why don't you get on so-and-so's schedule? She's going to be able to do what you want. So I just kind of pushed a lot of different clients away to other practitioners that I trusted to do the deep tissue work that they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And that benefited me because then I could concentrate on what I really loved and become more efficient at what I was doing. And the people who wanted it and appreciated it started referring people for this new thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it did take a little bit of time. It did take about, again, I think around 2 years before I was doing all NKT work all the time.
Wow.
Go ahead.
Oh, no. I want to hear what you have to say.
No, I was just going to say, and that I'm berating myself a little bit by saying that, because one of the things that I really took home with learning NKT from David and how I teach my students is NKT isn't meant to just be NKT, because you have release, you have correctives. It's meant to combine with whatever you already do.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do Pilates, you want to be able to combine it into that. If you do massage, combine it into that, PT, so on and so forth, So is it all NKT? No, it's NKT is in to everything else that you do. You make it your own. So tangent.
Yeah. No, it's very true. And, I appreciate you talking kind of about the ethics of NKT, because I don't think I've talked about that with anybody yet. And that is something that's very true and very potent within the NKT community. And David really, really tries to push that forward with people, is just the kind of ethical standard that this community has. We want to help people get better, not just string them along so that we can pay our rent. There is like a really good ethical standard in this community. And you can see it even just outside of people's own practice, just in the way that people are very kind and sharing of information and treating each other well in this community. Just even yourself, the fact that you'd be willing to come on and share so many business secrets and things that you've learned in your experiences so freely with people. That kind of community that NKT has is really a privilege. And, I think that's just thanks to David for being that great role model of a good ethical standard. But I appreciate you bringing that up and saying that. That's really a great thing about NKT.
Most welcome.
Yeah. I'm curious. Earlier, also, you had talked about when you took, level 1, level 2, level 3, and there would be these, your brain's exploding kind of moments. What were some of the things, just going back here a little bit, what were some of the things that maybe you struggled with the most? That's like, this part of my brain exploded during the seminar and I have not been able to put it back together yet. What were just the hardest things for you to grasp?
So level 1, it was straight up the testing. Like, I remember sitting there and saying in the middle of the entire class, when David was asking, does anybody have any questions? How are you feeling about things? And I was straight up like, I'm going to have to learn the tests, because we literally had David's book, but we didn't have, like what we have now, where you can actually learn the muscle testing, kind of get an idea beforehand. You had David's book, and the book without the class doesn't make any sense. And that's brilliant, because then you kind of get the book and you go, okay, now what do I do with it?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get to the class, then you kind of go, oh, now I get it. Now I know. But I had no muscle testing experience whatsoever. So that was the hardest part for me. I told him flat out, I'm like, the protocol is brilliant. It makes sense. I totally get where you're coming from. That's great. Like, my downfall is going to be learning all the tests. So that was the biggest thing for level 1, is learning the tests. And I think, so another little tangent, I think a lot of people get really hung up in, was it at 45 degrees or was it more like 30 degrees? It's like, you don't have to be so specific, because that's, again, one of the things we talk about all the time is we're testing a function. We name what we're testing in order to communicate effectively with each other, right? So if I'm sending somebody because they need something else to a different NKT practitioner, I can say, this is what we tested, this is what we found. We all speak the same language and everybody understands what's going on. But I think that is one of the biggest things, was learning to be accurate, but not overly anally accurate. You don't have to be so ridiculous with it. Get a really good grasp and a good feel of it. That was my level 1. Level 2 was more like, level 2 was interesting because, like I said, level 2, I went in and I went, oh, I know way more than I thought I did. I felt really good.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a very valuable lesson about myself at level 2 is when I'm the rock star at the table, I was kind of in my element, but it was better for me to be the one that was lagging behind. Okay. So if I had to keep up with what was going on, I was like, okay, because then I was learning more. I was trying to keep up, trying to be uber focused as opposed to running the table, be like, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and which of course was fun. But midway through level 2, I ended up at Thomas Wells' table, and him and I really clicked, and to this day he's one of my nearest and dearest. But it was just one of those things where I was like, oh shit. Like, okay, now this is why I need to learn what I need to learn,
Mm-hmm.
So with my level 2, I would think it was just a matter of, again, there's just so much more out there that I didn't know, right? Level 3, by level 3, I was good. Like, it all just, it clicked. It felt really good. I'm trying to think if there was anything in level 3 that I was just like, honestly, I don't think level 3 did it for me like that. I don't think I had brain explosions with level 3. Just because at that point I had seen so much transition with the NKT protocols and how we were elevating things. That's one of the things I love about NKT is that we don't stick with the same old, right? We don't go, well, it works, so we're going to keep doing it, when there's new information that comes in and says, well, that worked, but it's not working the way you thought it was. So let's tweak it a little bit, and we're going to make it work even better because now we know XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's priceless because growth means change, right? So by that time, I was very comfortable with trying to reprogram, reorganize where things were in my brain and how I did things to make it go very smooth. So level 3 was kind of like the all-stars of NKT was what my level 3 was.
Okay.
So it turned into a big party. Like, we all went out to dinner. I mean, I remember I'm at a freaking restaurant, and Sky from Arizona, Sky's like, drink it from the bottle, girl. I'm like, sure. I had no kids. My husband wasn't there. I was having a good time with my NKT people. So level 3 was like just a big family reunion kind of party. So it was very enjoyable.
Oh, that's fun. So, you had kind of muscle testing technicality, confusion doing level 1. And I mean, that was, I think 5 years ago, back when you did level 1. That's right? And now as an instructor, do you see those same kind of confusions with people when you teach, or are confusions in different areas? What are some of the big mistakes you see a lot of students make now?
So getting muscle testing under control is the biggest one. I'm finding a lot of people are coming into NKT now that actually have a muscle testing background. So they've already been exposed to it in other trainings. So it's not new to them. The wrapping the head around it is the pressure that we use. We're not trying to break things. We're not trying to be super heavy. We're kind of wrapping it around. It's not about strength, so I think that's the hardest thing for people to, really kind of configure is it's not strength. We're looking for that neuro involvement. We're looking to say, hey, you do your job, not, hey, you do your job with 6 other people helping you out.
Mm-hmm.
So that one is a big one. Another mistake I see people make is like that first couple of weeks after class, they really want to learn NKT, they really want to do NKT, and then they start doing it and they get lost and they just kind of freak out, which is understandable. You know, it sucks when you're in the middle of working on somebody and all of a sudden you're like, I don't know where to go.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to do. And you stand back and you go, you know, kind of, I'm thinking, but you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people make the mistake of not owning that, right? As opposed to, like, I still to this day, if I get one of them funky clients that I'm just like, I just can't, there's something going on that I can't figure out. I tell them flat out, I'm like, I'm not sure what's going on here, but I have a community of 4,000, 4,500 people, whatever it is right now, that I'm going to, with your permission, kind of give them an idea of your case and see what they think. You know, I flat out will own the fact that I don't know everything. And
Wow.
if I get stuck, I have a whole community that's like worldwide ready to answer or throw out an idea that goes, hey, you know, I had somebody last week who had the same thing. Did you try this? And then they kind of get excited, right? Because now all of a sudden the client or the patient feels very important, right? Because all of a sudden there's going to be 4,000 people trying to help them out. And they love it. They eat it up. They think it's the best thing ever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's amazing, you know, because then they're like, dude, she's honest. She's legit, right? She just said something's going on that she can't figure out, but she's going to ask people, you know, other practitioners of different, you know, backgrounds, and maybe we can get an answer. Whereas they haven't had any answers yet. So if they can get an answer and it's coming from Norway or something like that, then they're like, yes. You know, so I think that's the mistake that a lot of people make is they don't just kind of go, you know what, I am stuck right now, but I'm going to write this down. I'm going to try and get some help from outside sources if you're willing to let me do that. And then we're going to come back to it the next appointment and we're going to try out these new ideas. And then revert to what you do know, you know, so don't just go, well, I wasn't able to NKT you today, so we're done. No, what did you do before? You know, that was effective before you learned NKT, because you got results before too. You know, so don't be afraid to say, you know, like I said, I'm a little stuck right now, but I'm going to do this to kind of put the Band-Aid on it until next week. And then we'll see what happens, you know, what ideas I can come up with afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Have there been times when you've, you know, really been confused and kind of had those pause moments and maybe something clicked for a second and it was like, oh, that's what I was missing, and now that cleared all the confusion? I mean, what are things that you kind of think of that before you get to the point of you need to tell them that you are confused and maybe don't know what to do with them quite yet? Before you get to that point, what are maybe some things you do where you say, okay, I'm confused, but let me like pause and think about this and figure out where to go from here? Are there things you kind of revert back to or ways to kind of reset your mind with confusion or anything like that?
I talk to myself.
No, I do too. I totally get that.
So that's kind of like one of those pre-warning things I tell people when they come in. I flat out say, I'm going to talk to myself because it helps me process. You can listen or you can turn me out. You know, whatever you want to do is perfectly fine with me, but it's not going to stop, you know, because I literally do that every session. I kind of give a whole play-by-play of what's going on and why, because it helps me to hear it out loud as I'm seeing it happening on the table. You get some clients that are really into that because then they're like, oh, I bet it's my iliacus. They start throwing stuff out too because they've been paying attention. So that's what I tend to do is I'm giving a play-by-play of what's going on, but then when I get stuck, I kind of back off and I literally do what I just kind of like, I'm thinking, try to figure it out. And I reverse everything that I just did. So I said, okay, I tested this, and this. This is how it showed up. I TL'd this, and this, and this. That didn't work. What's the bigger picture that I'm missing? I just am spewing it out, helping my thought process. And most of the time that works. It's like, okay, all of a sudden, you get it. Or it makes you remember something else, like some obscure thing that maybe you and the client had talked about 6 sessions ago or whatever. And you're like, now you had that sledding accident when you were 6 years old. What happened there? And then they, say something ridiculous. Oh yeah, I ended up falling on my head like that. And you're like, yeah. Okay. I bet this is somewhere in there, so it's just a matter of talking myself through it.
And do you, kind of getting into your office experience now, I mean, when clients do come in, what kind of prep work do you do before they come in and see you? Like for a first-time client, do you have them like go to my website and read about me, or here's some info I want you to understand of what I'm going to do with you? Or do they just come in and have like no clue and you explain it in person? Or what's that first client experience like with you?
The vast majority of the people I get are either by referral or they have found me through my website because they're researching a specific thing like back pain or whatever, and they end up at my site. Or, like I said, my mouth-to-mouth referrals are kind of huge. The vast majority of my practice is from almost 2 hours away from where I live and where I practice, just because you get one person, the next thing you know, you have their entire friends and family group coming out too, and it just keeps happening that way. But so they have a better idea of what's going to happen. I have a disclaimers button on the very bottom of my website too that they have to sign before, at the time they're making their appointment, whether they read it or not. It's kind of on them, but they sign for it. So it kind of gives a little brief introduction of what we're going to do and why. And now when somebody actually comes in, their first appointment, I tend to do about an hour and 15 minutes. And about 15, 20 minutes of that is all health history and whatnot. And then we start actually working, and I explain to them about motor control, the fact that, the muscle testing that we're going to do is our in to the nervous system. It's our in to seeing what's going to happen. Because that's how we communicate. We're able to tap that in because the muscle either, has that neural lock or it's kind of latent. It's wavering a little bit. It's not dead on. So that's our cue to understand that there's a glitch somewhere, and we're going to try to figure out what it is. So they get it pretty well. That's what we're looking for. I'm very, very honest as well. Like some of the stuff on my website is about understanding pain and the recovery and all that stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's happening with that. But I'm extremely honest with my clients that I'm not exactly worried about their pain. that might be a wrong thing to say, but pain is subjective, right? So I can't say, well, you're not in pain if you feel pain. What we can do is muscle test, and we can see that the testing, that when we do a TL, that something activates, and then we do the corrective, and everything's on strong and functioning the way it's supposed to be. That's measurable change. And when we correct movement imbalances like that, pain usually goes away, and that's one of the things that my clients will understand very early on. And that's how I like to teach too, is that when we correct these imbalances, there's usually not a reason to have pain unless there's something that we don't know about, going on. But when you're moving well, you feel well. When you move like crap, you feel like crap. It's one of those things where it's like, which came first? We don't really know, but as NKT practitioners, what we can do is make sure that you're moving well. So I think that's, they understand that, they get that, and that's all covered in that very first session. And then they start to realize, oh, hey, when I turn my neck here, it hurts. And then after the session, when I turn my neck here, it doesn't hurt. So you have increased range of motion with more ease. So the likelihood is that pain is going to go away after the fact.
Yeah. I've got a few questions about this, but I know you brought up a lot of things I want to ask questions about. When you start doing your testing with somebody, are there certain tests that you always begin with, or a certain testing protocol you begin with, or are there certain ones that maybe you would never begin with at the beginning? Or is it all just based on what the client's needs are?
Yep.
Okay.
So I have this thing. A lot of practitioners always start with the core, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's fantastic. We have to have the core stabilized for everything, because as you get into the higher levels, you understand that it's milliseconds. It's firing before any other movement. So you want to make sure that that is actually functional. But if somebody comes in and they have a neck problem or a wrist problem or an ankle problem, I'm doing that first. Okay. Now, depending on who they are, if they have a really open kind of fun personality when they're in, I can play with it, right? I can go up and I can show them, how ankle instability and pelvic instability kind of marry each other, right? And you can see how, you can go up and you can test the core, and you can see how testing the ankle is going to improve the core, and vice versa. But I always start where their primary complaint is, and then use the core as an after effect. Make sure that, okay, now let's make sure that all this is good, because we need that good foundation, right? But if they come in and they have a wrist problem and I start with the core, it makes them go, well, wait a minute, I have a wrist problem. I don't have a core problem. My back is fine. Why are you doing that? So it's easier for them to buy into the protocol and buy into what you're doing when you address the problem that they walked in your door for. So it's all who's walking in with what is how my whole practice goes.
Okay, yeah. And then what kind of assessments, or maybe orthopedic assessments or range of motion tests or things like that might you do before you start doing your NKT to kind of guide you with your NKT? Are there standards with that, or is that all based on clients' needs, or what's that like with you?
Yep. So I, kind of followed suit. Taking NKT, you learn about all different kinds of classes, right? You see all these awesome practitioners doing all these awesome things, and you want to know what they're doing. So I followed suit at the very beginning, and I took some of the classes that they talked about, some very well-known classes for assessments and whatnot. And I was like, okay, cool. Rarely used them. I'm a very stripped down version of NKT practitioner, I guess you'd say. So when somebody comes in and they say, I'm having trouble doing XYZ, that's my assessment. What are you having trouble doing? Well, I'm having trouble brushing my hair. Okay, so flexion, extension, external rotation, all that stuff is involved with this, right? But all they had to tell me is they're having trouble brushing their hair. I can't wash my own hair in the shower. I can't get there. I can't brush it. So I'm very movement oriented to what they can and cannot do. So I tend to ask, what are you having trouble with? How does it feel? It's very subjective in nature, because with correctives, it's going to be the same, right? So we have our protocol, and we need to activate the inhibited muscle after we release the facilitated muscle. So we do that, and then I have them do what they have trouble doing, So what's my exercise? I'm not trained for correctives. I don't have a CES or anything like that. I can't actually assign any kind of exercise program. So I will tell them often to mimic the test, because it's the easiest thing to activate. But when they're brushing their hair, they're activating what was inhibited already, right? So that's something that I want them to go one step further. People who I can't bend over and tie my shoes, well, how am I supposed to correct this? Like, well, you're going to release this, you're going to activate this, and then you're going to tie your shoes 6 times a day, So that, for me, it's very, very functional with assessments and correctives, because that's in my scope. Movement is in my scope, doing that type of stuff, but assigning specific things, doing X number times a day, this specific thing, not so much. So that's how I'm able to have a very good clean conscience with doing it, but making it very effective with them. That's one of the things I've talked a lot about lately with some Pilates instructors that are having trouble. And I've told them, I'm like, well, first and foremost, you're a Pilates instructor, right? So, caveat, I don't do Pilates. I'm not a Pilates instructor. But they want to learn NKT and they want to implement it in their practice, and they're struggling. They can't figure out how to do it. It's like, first and foremost, you're a Pilates instructor. So people are coming to you to learn how to do Pilates, and they want that efficient movement. And you've got your previous training that you're seeing this movement and you're like, there's something going on there, or they feel clumsy or clunky when they're trying to do a movement, or they feel like they can't get into it as easily as they should. Break out your NKT, do the corrective real quick, have them go right back into the movement. They go back into the movement and they go, oh, that was easier. I feel like a Pilates badass now, so you did exactly what they were asking for you to do, which is to teach them Pilates and to do it effectively and efficiently. So that whole functionality thing, I think, is extremely important in everyday work that we do.
No, that's really helpful. That's really great. Yeah. So you'll bring people in, you've explained to them what you're going to do. You do kind of these functional assessments, an oral assessment of what's their complaint and what's the movement or difficulty that they have. Then you start your testing with them. And then I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the correctives. Yeah, you just do what people can't do. You have them, this was the inhibited area, this was the difficult movement. You just have them repeat that. And that's kind of your homework assignments with people.
Yeah. So if they have something very specific, right? Like let's use iliacus and glute max, right? Because everybody finds that relationship all day long. So say they have a facilitated iliacus and, glute max is weak in the clear, or inhibited within that neurological relationship. So I would have them release iliacus however they can, however they feel comfortable doing. And then my favorite for glute max is squeeze your cheek. Most people cannot simply squeeze one cheek, but if they do that on the table, then they're gaining that awareness of that area, just trying to let that little flutter happen. But then what's going to happen? They're going to get up and they're going to walk. So they have to have some, to my thinking, they have to have some kind of like global functional movement that is going to help cement it even more. So if they release, flutter, and then get up and walk, or get up and go up and down the stairs because maybe they were feeling that, weakness trying to get up the stairs. That's what I want them to do.
Okay. So that's super helpful to hear the whole process of somebody coming in and going through your office like that. I'm curious, how much of your NKT do you actually use? I mean, you're talking about how, you got a Pilates instructor, they're first a Pilates instructor, and when people come in and see you, I mean, is the whole session NKT? Is only a little bit of it NKT? Is it a first-time client, mostly NKT, and then when they come back, it's a little bit? I mean, how much NKT are you implementing? And it sounds like you're doing NKT with all of your sessions that you have, or the majority of them. But how much time will you actually spend doing the NKT in a session?
Well, my first client sessions are 1 hour and 15. My follow-up appointments are about 45 minutes. So all that time, I'm doing exactly, what we've talked about. We're doing the assessments, the movement assessments. What can't you do? What are you having trouble with? How does it feel? I'm looking at those movements going, okay, I'm going to test, the external rotators. I'm going to test, this and that. Then I go right in after explaining to them about muscle testing, what we're looking for. Like I said, I do my play-by-play. So then, they're understanding that they're going to TL, that they're establishing a relationship, then we're going to break out the protocol. I mean, this is it the whole time, and then we have them after each correction, okay, get up, do the movement again, right? So there's that brushing the hair thing. So I might make, a correction or two in the shoulder, and I'm like, okay, sit up, or go walk around, kind of get the whole body moving. Now try and brush your hair. If we started here and then we got to here, that's objective change, right? They're like, oh, hey, that's, I could probably be a little bit better with this. Mm-hmm. And then we just keep going, find another correction that does the same thing. So that's why the movement in particular is important for me. The way I practice is, I might, out of 4 or 5 corrections, send them home with one, because we're lucky if they do one. Mm-hmm. So the one that made the biggest change, and then do the movement. So everything else is still getting activated in that movement, right? So this is how every session goes every single time. The follow-up sessions, they come in and I say, okay, we're going to recheck what we did. How's the movement? They might say, well, it's easier for me to get my, arm up, but I'm still having trouble going down this way. So flexing the elbow is still a little bit of an issue. Okay, we maybe didn't spend as much time on that last time. Now we're going to do cleanup. We're going to bulletproof. We're going to see what else is affecting it. And, and then I start getting into more global, obscure stuff where, something over here on the opposite side could be affecting what's going on over here. Mm-hmm. So that is literally hour and 15, 45.
Wow. Yeah. The whole session is NKT or based on NKT concepts or things like that. Wow. That's great.
Yep. Whatever corrective, whatever releases, whatever else I need to throw in. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And then how much of the NKT do you act on? I mean, you were talking about earlier, somebody comes in, they have a complaint, their wrist is bothering them. You'll work with that and you'll test on that. But at what extent do you say, okay, we found the issue. We don't need to really do a whole lot more muscle testing. Now it's time for correctives and retest and reassess and things like that. I mean, how far do you go with testing until you say, okay, we know what we need to know. Now let's move on.
Are you asking if I just find 1 week in the clear muscle and go from there, or do I kind of break up pattern?
Yeah, I'm curious about, how many relationships you try to find, because I find that with a lot of people who are beginning in KT, they'll, oh, you got a shoulder problem, and they'll blast through like every possible shoulder problem relationship that they can find, and they'll spend, a whole hour just trying to find as many relationships as possible. But, at what point do you say, okay, I know that this is the one relationship we need to find, and that's it. We don't need to test like every single thing that's possible. What are kind of your ideas with how much testing you actually need to do until you can cut off testing and move on to correctives or other things?
Again, that's kind of tricky because it's based upon each client.
Well, could you give like a few different examples of maybe a client where you would do more testing, or a client where you might do less testing? Or
Yep. So the very young and the very old, I do a lot less actual muscle testing.
Okay, that's interesting.
Or people who have chronic fatigue and things like that. Just because those are going to be different factors that play into how the tests are going to read. I might not be on my game that day for somebody who comes in who has a shoulder issue, who also has chronic fatigue, and say I'm maybe not catching it. And maybe I have gone a little too far and, we've blown them out, right? I've done way too much testing. And I just didn't. That was on me. I didn't catch the fact that they were already done. We had already given the nervous system way too much input. Then there's other people that, are just, I could go all day. Like we could do hours upon hours and they just want to keep finding relationships. They're good. They're happy with it. What else can we find? They're excited. They're very involved with what's going on. But for the most part, I tend to, now I do something completely different than I tell my level 1 students. So when level 1 students are first starting, because it can be so complicated, I tell them flat out, if you have an idea, somebody's coming in with a shoulder issue and you test something on the shoulder, the first weak muscle you get to, do the protocol. Find it. And if you get that correction, fantastic. It's a win. Sometimes it'll take you a good 15, 20 minutes the first time, that you're trying to find these relationships and you're like, where else am I supposed to TL? I feel like I've TL'd everything. So you can be chasing around for a little bit. So just keep it small. Now in practice for me, I might test, somebody who does have a neck issue, I might test a lot of the different neck muscles. If they also have a history of, like we show in the seminars all the time, it's my favorite part to show people who've had whiplash, so I'll go, do you also have low back pain? Yeah. Okay. So I might test a bunch of different things before I find the one TL that's going to take care of things. And that right there is where NKT can be very, very powerful, because people will leave there going, she fixed like 50 different muscles and there was one thing that was wrong, or, the NKT students are like, how does that happen? How does that happen? You see all these crazy stories, case studies and things like that. And it's because people have played with it a little bit. They're feeling confident in their testing, and they start to recognize patterns, and they test a little bit more than maybe than you actually need to, just to see how many things are going to be affected. And that's a great way to have clients do the buy-in, right? Because they do see that everything in their core and low back and their neck was all involved in one correction. But it is just by each person. You kind of have to just be able to test and see they're done. Maybe you're trying to do some muscle testing and they ain't having it, right? You get those people that are like, you want me to do what? And if they don't want to test, then you know what? Don't test. They're not for you. They're not your client. And that's where you have the choice of, okay, dig in, refer out, or whatever. But I don't think there's any solid rules other than just really tune in to who's on your table and how involved they are and how they're responding.
Yeah. No, that's good advice. That's helpful. Well, a couple more questions here. I'm curious, we've gone through kind of your story of learning NKT and your office experience and whatnot. Are there any good resources or books or things that you read that really helped you understand NKT better? Maybe things that were kind of outside the world of NKT, but like, oh, then I read this book and it's like, that really helped me understand concepts of motor control and functional movement, things like that. Were there any like good books that kind of helped you along with your NKT as well that you could share?
Again, in the beginning, I went through all the lists, right? So like Movement by Greg Cook. I read the Anatomy Trains book, which, oh my God, that's so dry. Trying to get through that is like,
yeah.
Keep pulling my fingernails out, please. It's so much good information, but it's like, Evan Osar's book, what is it? The Shoulder and Hip Complex Correctives. I can't even think of it. I have all those. Like I literally, anytime somebody would mention something, I would get it and I would read it, and it kind of all played in. There wasn't any one thing that just went, got it. Like I said, my best experiences with learning NKT and how to apply it, especially since I didn't have, any study groups or anything like that I could do or take part of, was, like I said, stalking the advanced practitioners. So like Eric Nelson, Thomas Wells, Kathy Dooley. I actually assisted Kathy Dooley's first level 1 seminar that she ever taught. So that was fun seeing somebody other than David teach. That was kind of an experience. Nobody had seen that before, right? So that was pretty fun. But just being very active on the scholars pages was huge. Like I read everything. My book is a nightmare. Like I have case studies from, early scholars page days where somebody would throw something out and I'd write it all over the book and I'd, have arrows and highlight, and it's tragic what that book looks like. But yeah, anything I could pick up from anybody was helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. You really dug in and you really searched for as much information. That's great.
Yep. Pretty much.
Well, Marissa, this has been really awesome. Do you have any just last parting advice that you give to students of NKT? Just a last word.
Don't give up. It's so worth it. It's
Yeah.
so worth it. You know, and it's one of the things we joke around about all the time is if you haven't thrown the book at least 2 or 3 times, you're not doing it right. You know, you literally have to just chuck that book across the room and be like, wow. And that's usually when we have the best breaking moments that, you know, it's time to, you know, really dig in, and then we get it. But yeah, that's the biggest thing. Utilize every single resource we have. We have so many resources now between the Vimeos and the Facebook pages and the subgroups, the advanced practitioners, all the instructors. Everybody wants to help, you know, so randomly shoot out a Facebook message or an email, or, you know, a lot of times the private study groups, you know, you can Skype in to certain ones, which you can with mine as long as Skype is up and running. Didn't work out so hot this past weekend, but you know, just take advantage of all the resources and just don't give up. Ask, because somebody's been there before and somebody was able to get through it, and you can too. You gotta want it, and just don't give up.
Yeah, that's great. Well, my book's on a Kindle, so I won't be throwing it across the room, but maybe I'll have to buy a paperback one so I can throw it, so I can qualify in the
Good call.
throwing the book across the room group.
It feels good.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. I imagine it would feel good. Well, Marissa, this has been super fun and great to talk to you about all your experiences. I just thank you so much for wanting to share. It's been an honor and a pleasure hearing from you. You know, I just look forward to talking to you more in the future, but thanks so much for being here today and wanting to share with everybody.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.